David Chen stood in front of the tall glass building, looking up at the shiny letters that spelled Sterling Tech Industries. His hands were shaking a little, not from the cold morning air, but from worry. He was wearing his only good shirt, the one he used to wear to his old office job. It was clean and pressed, but you could tell it had seen better days. At 31 years old, David never thought he would be here, asking for a job, cleaning floors. But life has a way of surprising you, and not always in good ways. 2 years ago, his world fell apart when his wife Lisa got very sick. She fought hard against cancer, but in the end, the disease won. The medical bills kept coming even after she was gone, like a cruel reminder of his loss. David had been working as a bookkeeper at a small company. He was good with numbers, always had been since school. But when the company had money troubles, they had to let people go. David was one of them. At first, he thought he would find another job quickly. He had experience, good references, and was willing to work hard. But month after month, the answer was always the same. "We'll call you back." But they never did. The savings account that he and Lisa had built together slowly disappeared. First, it went to pay for her medical treatment. Then it went to pay for her funeral. After that, it went to pay rent and buy food for his 7-year-old son, Tommy. Tommy was the light of David's life, the reason he got up every morning and kept trying. Last week, David got a notice from his landlord. If he didn't pay rent soon, they would have to leave their small apartment. Tommy didn't know how bad things were. David made sure of that. Every night, he helped Tommy with homework, read him stories, and tucked him into bed, pretending everything was okay. But after Tommy fell asleep, David would sit at the kitchen table looking at bills he couldn't pay and job applications that led nowhere. That's when he saw the job posting for a night janitor at Sterling Tech. The pay wasn't much, but it was steady work. More importantly, it was night work, which meant he could take care of Tommy during the day and work while Tommy slept. Mrs. Park, their elderly neighbor, had offered to check on Tommy during the night hours. She was a kind woman who understood what it meant to struggle. David took a deep breath and walked through the glass doors. The inside of the building was even more impressive than the outside. Everything was clean and modern, from the marble floors to the fancy light fixtures. The security guard at the front desk looked at David's worn clothes and pointed him toward the elevator. The human resources office was on the 3rd floor. David sat in the waiting area, watching well-dressed. People walked by with briefcases and confident smiles. He felt out of place, like he didn't belong in this world of success and money. But he thought about Tommy's laugh, about the way his son's eyes lit up when he talked about wanting to be a scientist someday. And David knew he had to try. When they called his name, David met with a woman named Jennifer from the hiring department. She looked at his application and seemed surprised. "You have experience in accounting," she said, looking up at him. "Why are you applying for a janitor position?" David had practiced this answer, but it was still hard to say. "I need work now," he said simply. "I have a son to take care of, and I can't wait for the perfect job. I'm willing to work hard at any honest job." Jennifer studied his face for a moment. David could see she understood that there was more to his story, but she didn't push. Sometimes people end up in situations they never expected, and sometimes they just need a chance. "The position is for night shift," she explained. "You would work from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. Monday through Friday. The pay is $15 an hour. David did the math quickly in his head. It wasn't much, but it would cover rent and basic groceries. "I'll take it," he said without hesitation. "Don't you want to know what the job involves?" Jennifer asked. "I'll learn whatever I need to learn," David replied. "I'm not afraid of hard work." Something in his voice must have convinced her, because Jennifer smiled for the first time during the interview. "All right, David, you start Monday night. Come in at 9:30 for training." That weekend, David prepared Tommy for the change. He explained that Daddy would be working at night now, but that Mrs. Park would be nearby if Tommy needed anything. Tommy, being 7 years old, thought it sounded like an adventure. "Will you be cleaning the computers, Daddy?" Tommy asked, his eyes wide, with curiosity. "Maybe." David smiled, ruffling his son's hair. I'll be taking care of the building where people work on computers and other important things. That's cool, Tommy said. You're like a superhero, but instead of fighting bad guys, you fight dirt and messes. David laughed, feeling lighter than he had in months. Leave it to Tommy to make everything sound important and special. Monday night came quickly. David kissed Tommy goodnight and walked to Mrs. Park's apartment next door. She assured him that she would check on Tommy every hour and that her phone was always on if there were any problems. The night supervisor at Sterling Tech was a man named Robert who had been working there for 10 years. He was patient and thorough, showing David where all the supplies were kept, how to use the cleaning equipment, and which areas needed attention each night. The most important thing, Robert explained as they walked through the building, is to be invisible. The people who work here during the day, they're dealing with important business. They don't want to think about who cleans up after them. They just want everything to be perfect when they arrive in the morning. David nodded, taking mental notes about everything. The building had 5 floors. The first floor had the lobby and reception area. The second and third floors had regular offices and meeting rooms. The fourth floor had the executive offices, and the fifth floor was mostly storage and the server room where all the computer equipment was kept. You'll mostly work on floors 1 through 3, Robert continued. The executive floor has special requirements, and usually only senior staff handle that. But for now, you have plenty to keep you busy. The work was physical, but David didn't mind. He had always believed that any honest work was good work. He vacuumed carpets, mopped floors, cleaned bathrooms, emptied trash cans, and wiped down desks and windows. Each task was simple, but doing it well for an entire building took time and attention. What surprised David was how much he enjoyed the quiet. During the day, the building was probably full of noise, phones ringing, meetings happening, people talking. But at night, it was peaceful. David could think while he worked, and sometimes he would find himself planning Tommy's future, imagining the day when his son would graduate from school, maybe even college. On his lunch break, David would video call Tommy. Even though Tommy was supposed to be sleeping, sometimes he would wake up and want to talk to Daddy. David would sit in the break room, looking at his son's sleepy face on the phone screen, helping him get back to sleep with a quiet song or a story. As the days turned into weeks, David fell into a routine. He would wake up when Tommy got ready for school, make breakfast, and walk Tommy to the bus stop. Then David would sleep for a few hours, pick Tommy up from school, help with homework, make dinner, and spend the evening together before going to work. It wasn't the life David had planned, but it was their life, and they were making it work. Tommy seemed happy, which was all that mattered to David. Mrs. Park had become like a grandmother to Tommy, and she would often have him help her with small tasks like watering plants or organizing her kitchen, keeping him busy and teaching him responsibility. At work, David took pride in doing his job well. He noticed things that others might miss: a spot on a window, dust on a picture frame, a piece of paper that had fallen behind a desk. He organized the supply closets better, making it easier to find cleaning materials. He even fixed a wobbly table in one of the meeting rooms using techniques he remembered from helping his father with home repairs years ago. Meanwhile, 5 floors above where David worked each night, another person was dealing with her own challenges. Victoria Sterling, the CEO and owner of Sterling Tech Industries, was known throughout the business world as one of the youngest and most successful technology entrepreneurs in the country. At 28, she had built her company from nothing into a multi-million-dollar business. But success had come at a price. Victoria worked 16-hour days, 7 days a week. She had no close friends, no romantic relationships, and no hobbies outside of work. Her employees respected her abilities but feared her demanding nature. She expected perfection from everyone, including herself, and she had little patience for mistakes or excuses. Victoria's office was on the 4th floor, a large space with floor-to-ceiling windows that looked out over the city. Most nights she worked late, often staying until midnight, or later. She ate dinner at her desk, attended video conferences with clients in different time zones, and reviewed reports and financial statements. She had built walls around herself after her father's business had failed when she was in college. That failure had destroyed her family's relationships and taught her that depending on others was dangerous. She learned to rely only on herself, to trust only her own judgment, and to keep her emotions separate from her business decisions. Victoria rarely interacted with the building maintenance staff. In her mind, they were invisible, just part of the building's operations. She expected the offices to be clean when she arrived each morning, but she never thought about who made that happen or how much work it involved. The stage was set for two very different worlds to collide in ways that neither David nor Victoria could have imagined. 3 weeks had passed since David started his job at Sterling Tech, and he was getting comfortable with his routine. He knew which offices needed extra attention, where people liked to eat lunch at their desks and left crumbs, and which bathrooms got the most use. The work was honest, and while it wasn't easy, David felt good about providing for Tommy. Every night, David would arrive at 9:30, change into his work clothes, and start his rounds. He had developed his own system for getting everything done, efficiently. He would start with the bathrooms, then move to emptying trash cans and finish with vacuuming and mopping. The building was usually empty by the time he arrived, except for the security guard at the front desk who would nod hello each evening. But on this particular Tuesday night, things were different. As David pushed his cleaning cart toward the elevator, he noticed lights were still on in several offices on the 4th floor. This was unusual. Most people left by 6 p.m. and it was already 10:30. David shrugged and figured someone was working late on an important project. He started his work on the 1st floor as usual, taking his time to make sure everything was perfect. The marble floors in the lobby needed to shine, and David took pride in getting them spotless. He could see his reflection in the surface when he was done, and that made him smile. Tommy would be proud if he could see Daddy's work. Around midnight, David finished the 2nd and 3rd floors and was ready to head to the 4th floor. Robert, the night supervisor, had told him that he would eventually learn to clean the executive floor, but for now he should focus on the main areas. However, David noticed that some trash cans on the 4th floor were overflowing, and the bathroom near the elevator looked like it needed attention. He decided to at least empty the trash and do a quick bathroom cleaning. It wouldn't take long, and it was the right thing to do. David had always believed that if you were going to do a job, you should do it completely. As he quietly emptied trash cans in the hallway, he could hear the soft sound of typing coming from one of the corner offices. The door was open slightly, and light spilled out into the hallway. David tried to work as quietly as possible, not wanting to disturb whoever was working so late. That's when it happened. As David was reaching for a trash can near the corner office, he accidentally bumped into it with his cleaning cart. The sound echoed in the quiet hallway, and suddenly the typing stopped. "Who's there?" came a sharp voice from inside the office. David's heart started beating faster. He hadn't meant to make noise or bother anyone. "Sorry, ma'am," he called out softly. "I'm just emptying the trash. I didn't mean to disturb you." There was a pause, then the sound of a chair rolling back. David continued working, hoping whoever it was would just go back to their work. But then he heard footsteps, and a woman appeared in the doorway. David looked up and saw someone he recognized from the employee handbook photos. It was Victoria Sterling, the CEO of the company. She was younger than he had expected, probably around his age, with dark hair pulled back in a neat style. She was wearing a business suit even though it was past midnight, and her expression was not friendly. "What are you doing on this floor?" Victoria asked, her voice cold and professional. "The executive floor has special cleaning requirements. Regular maintenance staff aren't supposed to be up here without supervision." David felt his face get warm. He hadn't known about special requirements, and now he was in trouble on only his 3rd week. "I'm sorry, Ms. Sterling," he said, recognizing her from the photos. "I saw the trash cans were full and I thought I should empty them. I was trying to be helpful." Victoria's eyes narrowed as she looked at him more carefully. "How do you know my name?" she asked. "Your picture is in the employee handbook," David explained. "I studied it when I started working here. I like to know about the company I work for." This seemed to surprise Victoria. Most people, especially maintenance staff, probably didn't bother reading about the company leadership. She looked at David's cleaning cart, then back at his face. "What's your name?" she asked. "David Chen, ma'am." I started 3 weeks ago on the night shift. Victoria nodded slowly. Well, David Chen, in the future, please stick to the floors you've been assigned. There are sensitive documents up here, and we can't have unauthorized people accessing this area. I understand, David said. It won't happen again. I was just trying to do a thorough job. Something in his tone made Victoria pause. He wasn't making excuses or arguing with her. He was simply accepting responsibility and promising to do better. This was unusual in her experience. Most people tried to justify their mistakes or blame someone else. Fine, she said finally. Finish what you started here, but don't come back to this floor without permission. David nodded and continued emptying the trash cans as quickly and quietly as possible. Victoria watched him for a moment, then went back to her office. But she didn't close the door completely, and David could sense that she was still aware of his presence. As David worked, he noticed how organized and clean Victoria's office area was compared to the other floors. It was clear that high standards were expected here. He made sure to be extra careful, wiping down surfaces that didn't really need it and making sure every trash can was perfectly clean. When he finished, David quietly pushed his cart toward the elevator. As he passed Victoria's office, he heard her say, "David." He stopped and turned toward her door. "Yes, ma'am?" "Thank you for taking initiative with the trash," she said, not looking up from her computer. "Just check with security next time before coming up here." "I will," David replied. "Have a good evening, Ms. Sterling." As the elevator doors closed, David realized his hands were still shaking slightly. Meeting the CEO hadn't been part of his plan for the evening, but at least he hadn't gotten fired. He finished his remaining work on the lower floors and headed home as the sun was starting to rise. Over the next few nights, David made sure to stay on his assigned floors. But he noticed that the lights on the fourth floor were on more often now. It seemed like Victoria Sterling was working even later than before, sometimes staying until 2 or 3 in the morning. David found himself curious about why someone so successful would need to work such long hours. During his lunch break, he would sometimes look up at the fourth floor windows from the parking lot and see the glow of her office light. It seemed lonely somehow. 1 week later, David was working on the 3rd floor when he heard the elevator open around 1 a.m. He looked up to see Victoria Sterling walking toward the vending machines near the break room. She looked tired, and David noticed she was rubbing her temples like she had a headache. Victoria didn't notice David as she stood in front of the vending machine, looking at the options. She put in some money and pressed a button, but nothing happened. She tried again, and again, nothing. David could see her frustration growing as she pressed the button harder and even gave the machine a small push. David hesitated for a moment, then set down his mop and walked over. "Excuse me, Mrs. Sterling," he said quietly. "That machine has been having problems. You have to press the button and then hit the side right here." He demonstrated by gently tapping a specific spot on the machine. Victoria looked at him with surprise. "How do you know that?" she asked. "I've seen other people have the same problem during my breaks," David explained. "The maintenance guy showed me the trick last week." Victoria pressed the button again and tapped where David had shown her. This time, a bottle of water fell down into the slot. "Thank you," she said, and for the first time her voice wasn't cold or professional. She sounded genuinely grateful. "You're welcome," David said, starting to walk back to his work. "David," Victoria called after him. He turned around. "You seem to notice things," she said. "That's unusual." David wasn't sure how to respond to that, so he just smiled. "I guess I pay attention to details. It helps me do my job better." Victoria studied his face for a moment. "What did you do before this job?" she asked. "I was a bookkeeper at a small company," David said. "I've always been good with organizing things and noticing when something isn't quite right." "Why did you leave?" Victoria asked, then immediately looked like she regretted asking such a personal question. David could have given a short answer, but something about the way she asked made him think she genuinely wanted to know. "The company had to let people go," he said simply. "I have a 7-year-old son to take care of, so I needed to find work quickly. This job has good hours for my situation. Victoria nodded slowly. She seemed to be processing this information. Well, she said finally, thank you for the help with the machine. As she walked back toward the elevator, David returned to his work, but he found himself thinking about their conversation. Victoria Sterling had a reputation for being tough and distant, but in that moment she had seemed almost human. Maybe everyone had struggles, even successful people. The next night, David noticed something different. When he came in for his shift, there was better coffee in the break room vending machine. It wasn't the cheap stuff that had been there before, but actual good coffee. David wondered if it was a coincidence, but he appreciated it during his midnight break. A few days later, David discovered that the heating system on the lower floors was working better. Previously, the building got quite cold during the night shift, and David had taken to wearing an extra sweater while he worked, but now the temperature was comfortable throughout the night. David didn't think much about these changes until one night when he overheard two day-shift security guards talking. Yeah, Sterling herself called about the coffee and the heating. One of them was saying. Said she wanted to make sure the night shift was comfortable. Never seen her care about stuff like that before. David felt a strange warmth in his chest. He couldn't be sure, but it seemed like Victoria was looking out for the night workers, including him. It was a small thing, but it meant a lot to someone who was used to being invisible. That same week, Tommy got sick with a bad cold. David had to take him to the doctor, which meant missing sleep and spending money they didn't really have for medicine. Tommy was running a fever and couldn't go to school, which meant David couldn't sleep during the day like usual. By Thursday night, David was exhausted. He had been taking care of Tommy around the clock, and his son was finally feeling better, but David was running on very little sleep. Still, he couldn't afford to miss work, especially not when he was still relatively new. During his shift that night, David was moving slower than usual. His eyes were burning from lack of sleep, and he kept yawning. He was doing his best to maintain his usual standards, but it was harder than normal to focus. Around 2 a.m., as David was cleaning the third floor, he realized he had been staring at the same spot on the floor for several minutes without actually mopping it. He shook his head, trying to wake himself up. He couldn't afford to mess up his job, not when Tommy was depending on him. That's when he heard footsteps behind him. David turned to see Victoria Sterling standing there, looking at him with concern instead of her usual businesslike expression. "David," she said quietly, "are you all right? You look exhausted." David straightened up, trying to look more alert. "I'm fine, Ms. Sterling. Just a little tired tonight." Victoria studied his face more carefully. "When was the last time you slept?" she asked. The question was so direct and caring that David felt his defenses crumble a little. "My son has been sick," he admitted. "I've been taking care of him during the day and working at night. He's better now, so things will get back to normal soon." Victoria was quiet for a long moment. "How old is your son?" she asked. 7, David said. "His name is Tommy." "Is he feeling better now?" "Yes. His fever broke yesterday. He should be able to go back to school tomorrow." Victoria nodded. "That's good." She paused, then said something that surprised David completely. "You should go home early tonight. Get some rest." David shook his head quickly. "No, ma'am, I can't do that. I need to finish my work. I can't afford to get behind." "David," Victoria said firmly, "you're no good to anyone if you collapse from exhaustion. Finish this floor, then go home. That's not a request, it's an order." David looked at her face and realized she was serious. "Thank you," he said quietly. "I really appreciate it." As Victoria walked back toward the elevator, she turned and said, "David, take care of yourself. Your son needs you healthy." For the first time since starting this job, David felt like someone actually saw him as a person, not just as the guy who cleaned the floors. And for reasons he couldn't quite understand, that person was the CEO of the company, someone who had every reason to treat him as just another employee. As David finished his work and headed home early that night, he found himself thinking that maybe, just maybe, there was more to Victoria Sterling than her cold reputation suggested. And maybe there was more to his future at Sterling Tech than just mopping floors and emptying trash cans. The next morning after Victoria had sent David home early, something unexpected happened. David woke up to find a small package outside his apartment door. Inside was a bottle of children's medicine for fever and cough, along with a note that simply said, "For Tommy. Get well soon." There was no name on the note, but David had a feeling he knew who had left it. When David went to work that night, he wanted to thank Victoria, but he wasn't sure how to bring it up. He decided to focus on his work and see if she mentioned it first. Around midnight, as he was cleaning the second floor, Victoria appeared at the top of the stairs. "How is Tommy feeling?" she asked without any introduction, as if they had been talking all along. "Much better, thank you," David replied. "And thank you for the medicine. You didn't have to do that." Victoria looked a little uncomfortable, like she wasn't used to talking about personal gestures. "It wasn't a big deal," she said. "I just happened to be at the pharmacy anyway." David smiled. He had a feeling that wasn't exactly true, but he appreciated her kindness even more because she was trying to downplay it. "Well, it meant a lot to me and Tommy," he said. Over the next few weeks, these late-night conversations became more regular. Victoria would find reasons to come downstairs during David's shift, sometimes to get water from the vending machine, sometimes to check on things that probably didn't need checking. Their talks started with simple questions about work, but gradually became more personal. David learned that Victoria often worked late because she had trouble sleeping. She had built her company from nothing after her father's business failed when she was in college. The failure had destroyed their family's relationships and left Victoria feeling like she could only depend on herself. "I was 22 when it happened," Victoria told David one night as they sat in the break room during his lunch break. "One day we had everything, and the next day we lost our house, our friends stopped calling, and my father started drinking. I promised myself I would never be that vulnerable again." David listened carefully. He was starting to understand why Victoria seemed so guarded all the time. "That must have been really hard," he said. "But you built something amazing here. You should be proud of what you accomplished." Victoria looked at him with surprise. Most people either feared her success or wanted something from her because of it. David was the first person in years who seemed to see her as just a regular person who had worked hard to overcome difficult circumstances. "What about you?" Victoria asked. "You mentioned you were married before. What happened?" David's face grew sad, but he didn't look away. "My wife Lisa got sick with cancer 3 years ago. We fought it together for a year, but she didn't make it. The medical bills used up all our savings, and then I lost my job a few months later. That's how I ended up here." "I'm sorry," Victoria said quietly. "That must have been incredibly difficult, especially with Tommy." "It was the hardest time of my life," David admitted, "but Tommy kept me going. He needed me to be strong, so I found a way to be strong. Some days I didn't think I could do it, but then I would look at him and remember that he was depending on me." Victoria was quiet for a long moment. She had never heard someone talk about love and responsibility in such a simple, honest way. In her world, people talked about profits and strategies and market shares. David talked about taking care of the people who mattered to him, no matter what it cost. "You're a good father," Victoria said finally. "I try to be," David replied. "Tommy is smart and curious about everything. He wants to be a scientist when he grows up. He's always asking questions about how things work and why things happen the way they do." Victoria found herself smiling. "What kind of science does he like?" "Space, mostly," David said, his face lighting up. "He has books about planets and rockets, and astronauts. Sometimes at night we go up on the roof of our apartment building and look at the stars. He knows the names of all the constellations." Something in Victoria's chest felt warm when David talked about Tommy. She had never thought much about children or families, but the way David described his son made her curious about this little boy who loved stars and asked questions about everything. The next week, Victoria did something that surprised even herself. She was at a bookstore supposedly looking for business books when she found herself in the children's section. She picked up a book about space exploration with beautiful pictures of planets and spacecraft. Before she could change her mind, she bought it. The next night at work, she approached David during his break. "I saw this book and thought Tommy might like it," she said, handing him the package. "It has pictures of the Mars rovers and the space station." David opened the package and his face broke into a huge smile. "He's going to love this," he said. "Thank you so much, Ms. Sterling. This is really thoughtful." "Victoria," she said suddenly. "What?" David asked, confused. "Call me Victoria," she said. "We've been talking for weeks now. I think we can drop the formal titles." David smiled. "Okay, Victoria, and thank you again for the book. Tommy is going to be so excited." The next day, David called Victoria during his lunch break. "I had to tell you," he said, his voice full of happiness. "Tommy has been reading that book all day. He keeps asking me questions about Mars and whether people will really live there someday. You made his whole week." Victoria felt something she hadn't experienced in years, the simple joy of making someone else happy. It was a feeling she had forgotten was possible. "I'm glad he likes it," she said. "Maybe sometime you could bring him by the office. I'd like to meet him." The words surprised Victoria as much as they surprised David. She never invited personal connections into her work life, but something about David and his son had broken through her usual walls. "Are you sure?" David asked. "I don't want to bother you." "I'm sure," Victoria said. "Bring him by on Saturday morning. I usually work weekends anyway, and it would be nice to meet the future scientist." That Saturday, David arrived at Sterling Tech with Tommy, who was wearing his best clothes and carrying the space book Victoria had given him. Tommy was a little nervous about meeting his dad's boss, but he was also excited to see the inside of the big building where his father worked. Victoria met them in the lobby, and David was surprised to see her dressed casually in jeans and a sweater instead of her usual business suits. She looked younger and more relaxed than he had ever seen her. "You must be Tommy," Victoria said, kneeling down to be at eye level with the 7-year-old. "Your dad tells me you're interested in space." Tommy nodded shyly, then held up his book. "Thank you for this," he said in a small voice. "It's really cool. Did you know that Mars has ice at its poles just like Earth?" Victoria's face broke into a genuine smile. "I did know that," she said. "Would you like to see something interesting? We have a computer program here that can show you what Mars looks like up close." Tommy's eyes grew wide with excitement, and his shyness disappeared. "Really? Can we see the rovers?" "We can see everything," Victoria said, standing up and offering Tommy her hand. "Come on, let me show you." David followed as Victoria led them to her office on the 4th floor. She had set up a special computer presentation showing high-resolution images of Mars, including pictures taken by the rovers that were currently exploring the planet. Tommy was fascinated, asking question after question. Victoria answered each one patiently, and David was amazed to discover that she knew a lot about space science. When Tommy asked how rockets worked, Victoria pulled up videos and diagrams that explained rocket engines in terms a 7-year-old could understand. "How do you know so much about this?" David asked when Tommy was absorbed in looking at pictures of Saturn's rings. Victoria looked a little embarrassed. "I wanted to be an astronaut when I was his age," she admitted. "I studied astronomy and physics in college before I switched to business. I guess I never really lost interest in it." David could see a different side of Victoria emerging, one that was curious and passionate about learning, just like Tommy. As he watched her explain how telescopes worked to his son, David realized that underneath her successful, professional exterior was someone who had once been a child with dreams of exploring the stars. After 2 hours, Tommy was getting tired, but he was also completely enchanted with Victoria. "Can we come back sometime?" he asked her as they prepared to leave. "Of course," Victoria said. "And next time I'll show you the computer programs we use to design satellites." As they walked to the elevator, Tommy tugged on his father's sleeve. "Dad," he whispered loudly, "I like your boss. She's really smart and nice." Victoria overheard this and smiled. "I like you too, Tommy," she said. "You ask great questions." After David and Tommy left, Victoria sat in her office thinking about the morning. For the first time in years, she had spent time with people without talking about business or profits or strategies. She had just enjoyed being with a father and son who were curious about the world and kind to each other. That week, Victoria found herself looking forward to her late-night conversations with David even more than before. They talked about Tommy's school projects, about David's memories of his wife, and about Victoria's college years when she had dreamed of becoming a scientist instead of a business owner. "Do you ever regret changing paths?" David asked one night. Victoria thought about it carefully. "I used to think I didn't," she said. "Building this company gave me security and success. But lately I've been wondering what it would have been like to follow my original dreams." "It's not too late," David said. "You could still take astronomy classes or volunteer at a science museum. Tommy would love to learn more about space with someone who actually understands it." The idea hadn't occurred to Victoria before, but it sparked something in her mind. Maybe success wasn't just about building a company and making money. Maybe it was also about connecting with people and sharing the things you were passionate about. One evening, Victoria made a decision that would change everything. She had been thinking about David's situation for weeks. He was clearly intelligent and hardworking, with skills that were being wasted on cleaning floors. His attention to detail, his honesty, and his ability to organize and solve problems were exactly the qualities Sterling Tech needed in their accounting department. "David," she said during one of their late-night talks, "I want to offer you a different position." David looked surprised. "What kind of position?" "In our accounting department," Victoria said. "You have experience in bookkeeping, and I've seen how you work. You're careful, thorough, and honest. Those are the most important qualities for handling financial records." David stared at her in shock. "But I'm just the janitor," he said. "I don't have the right education or experience for a corporate job." "You have exactly the right character," Victoria replied firmly. "Skills can be taught. Integrity and dedication can't be. The position pays twice what you're making now, and it's during regular business hours, which means you could spend evenings with Tommy instead of working." David felt tears starting to form in his eyes. This opportunity was beyond anything he had dared to hope for. "Are you sure?" he asked. "I don't want special treatment just because we've become friends," Victoria smiled. "This isn't charity, David. This is good business. I need people I can trust, and I trust you. Besides, Tommy needs his father to have time for his science questions." As David accepted the offer and they shook hands, both of them realized that something important had shifted between them. What had started as a professional relationship between a CEO and a janitor had become something much deeper. They had found in each other someone who understood the value of hard work, the importance of family, and the courage to hope for something better. Neither of them was ready to admit it yet, but their friendship was beginning to feel like something that could change both of their lives in ways they never expected. David's first day in the accounting department was both exciting and terrifying. He wore his best shirt and tie, the same outfit he had worn to job interviews months ago, but this time he was actually starting a real office job. Victoria had arranged for him to work with Helen, a kind woman in her 50s who had been with the company for 10 years. "Don't worry," Helen said with a warm smile as she showed David to his desk. "Everyone starts somewhere. I'll teach you everything you need to know about our computer systems and procedures." David was grateful for Helen's patience, but he could feel some of the other employees watching him. Word had gotten around that the new guy in accounting used to be the night janitor, and not everyone was happy about it. During his first week, David overheard whispered conversations in the break room. "I can't believe Sterling hired the cleaning guy for an office position," one person said. "What qualifications does he have?" "It's not fair to people who went to college and worked their way up properly," another voice replied. David tried not to let the comments bother him, but it was hard. He worked extra hours to prove himself, double-checking every number and staying late to make sure his work was perfect. Helen noticed his dedication and made sure to praise his progress to anyone who would listen. "David catches mistakes that others miss," she told Victoria during their weekly department meeting. "He has a natural eye for detail, and he's not afraid to ask questions when something doesn't look right." Victoria felt proud hearing this, but she also worried about David. She could see the stress on his face and knew that some employees were making his transition more difficult than it needed to be. She made a point of stopping by the accounting department regularly, making it clear that David had her full support. Meanwhile, David's life at home had improved dramatically. With regular daytime hours, he could pick Tommy up from school, help with homework, and spend evenings together like a normal family. Tommy was thriving with the extra attention, and his grades were getting better. "Dad, can Victoria come to my school science fair?" Tommy asked one evening while they were eating dinner. "I'm doing a project about Mars rovers, and she knows so much about space stuff." David hesitated. He and Victoria had become close friends, but asking her to attend a school event felt like crossing a line into something more personal. "She's very busy, buddy," he said. "I'm not sure she would have time." But when David mentioned it to Victoria, the next day at work, her response surprised him. "I'd love to come," she said immediately. "What day is it?" The science fair was on a Thursday evening, and Victoria showed up wearing casual clothes and looking genuinely excited to see Tommy's project. David watched as she knelt down next to Tommy's display, asking him serious questions about his research and praising his creativity. "This is excellent work, Tommy," she said, examining his poster about different Mars missions. "You even included information about the soil samples. That's very advanced thinking." Tommy beamed with pride, and David felt his heart swell watching the two people he cared about most enjoying each other's company. Other parents at the science fair began asking Victoria questions about space exploration, and she ended up giving an impromptu mini-lecture about satellite technology. After the science fair, the three of them went out for ice cream. Tommy chattered excitedly about the other projects he had seen, while Victoria and David exchanged smiles over his enthusiasm. "Thank you for coming tonight," David said as they walked back to their cars. "It meant a lot to Tommy, and to me." "Thank you for inviting me," Victoria replied. "I had more fun tonight than I've had in years. Tommy is an amazing kid." As they said goodnight, David felt something shift in his chest. Looking at Victoria in the streetlight, laughing at something Tommy had said, he realized that his feelings for her had grown beyond friendship. But he pushed the thought away. She was his boss, and he was still just a guy trying to rebuild his life. Someone like Victoria Sterling would never be interested in someone like him. What David didn't know was that Victoria was having similar thoughts. Over the past few months, David and Tommy had become the best part of her life. She looked forward to their conversations at work, and she found herself thinking about them even when she was in important meetings. For the first time in years, she was experiencing what it felt like to care about people more than profits. The turning point came during the company's annual charity dinner, a fancy event where Sterling Tech raised money for local organizations. Victoria always attended alone, making polite conversation with clients and donors before leaving early to go back to work. This year was different. David was attending as part of the accounting team, wearing a rented tuxedo that made him look handsome and confident. Victoria found herself watching him from across the room as he talked with colleagues and clients, impressed by how naturally he connected with people. But the evening took a difficult turn when Victoria overheard a conversation. Near the bar, two men in expensive suits were discussing David, not realizing that Victoria was standing nearby. "Can you believe Sterling hired that janitor for a corporate position?" one of them said with a laugh. "I heard he's a single father who couldn't even keep his previous job. What was she thinking?" "Maybe she feels sorry for him," the other man replied. "Or maybe she's getting something else out of the arrangement, if you know what I mean." The implication in his voice made Victoria's blood boil. She had built her reputation on being professional and ethical, and hearing someone suggest otherwise about her relationship with David made her furious. More than that, she was angry that they were disrespecting David, who had worked harder than anyone to prove himself. Victoria walked over to the two men with fire in her eyes. "Excuse me, gentlemen," she said in a voice that could freeze water. "I couldn't help but overhear your conversation about my employee, David Chen." The men looked uncomfortable, realizing they had been caught gossiping about their host's business decisions. "Let me make something very clear," Victoria continued, her voice getting stronger. "David Chen is one of the most dedicated, honest, and capable people I have ever worked with. He was hired based on merit, not charity. In the 3 months since he joined our accounting team, he has caught errors that could have cost this company thousands of dollars. His attention to detail and work ethic exceed that of employees with twice his experience. The men tried to mumble apologies, but Victoria wasn't finished. Furthermore, she said, David's background as a single father who took whatever work he could find to support his son doesn't make him less qualified. It makes him more admirable. He has overcome challenges that most of us can't imagine, and he has done it with dignity and grace. This company is better because he's part of it, and anyone who has a problem with that can take their business elsewhere. Dumbing. The time Victoria finished speaking, several other people had gathered around, including David, who had heard the last part of her defense. He looked at Victoria with amazement and gratitude, but also with something deeper. He had never had anyone stand up for him so fiercely or speak about him with such respect and admiration. After the two men slunk away, Victoria turned to find David standing behind her. "You didn't have to do that," he said quietly. "Yes, I did," Victoria replied, her cheeks still flushed with anger. "No one talks about my friends that way." "Friends?" David asked, stepping closer to her. Victoria looked into his eyes and realized that the word didn't capture what she felt for him anymore. "David," she said softly, "I need to tell you something." Before she could continue, they were interrupted by the event coordinator asking Victoria to give her speech. But as she walked to the podium, Victoria's mind was racing. She had been about to tell David how she really felt about him, and the thought both thrilled and terrified her. Later that evening, after the charity dinner had ended, Victoria and David found themselves alone in her office. They had come back to the building together, ostensibly so David could pick up some work he had left behind, but really, because neither of them wanted the evening to end. "What were you going to tell me earlier?" David asked as they stood by the window looking out at the city lights. Victoria took a deep breath. For someone who gave presentations to rooms full of investors without breaking a sweat, this was the hardest thing she had ever had to say. "David, these past few months have changed my life," she began. "Before I met you and Tommy, I thought success was about building a company and making money and proving that I didn't need anyone. But you've shown me that real success is about the people you care about and the relationships you build." David felt his heart starting to race. "Victoria, let me finish," she said, holding up her hand. "I know this is complicated. I'm your boss and we come from different worlds, but I can't pretend anymore that my feelings for you are just friendship. You and Tommy have become the most important part of my life." David stepped closer to her. "Do you know why I work so hard every day?" he asked. "It's not just to prove myself to the other employees or to show that I deserve this job. It's because I want to be worthy of your faith in me. You saw something in me when no one else did, including myself." "You were always worthy, David," Victoria said softly. "I just helped you see it." They stood facing each other in the quiet office, both of them aware that they were at a crossroads. They could step back and try to keep their relationship professional, or they could move forward into something new and uncertain. "What about Tommy?" David asked. "This affects him too." Victoria smiled. "Tommy told me last week that he wishes I was his mom," she said. "When I asked him why, he said it's because I make you smile the way you used to smile in pictures with his mother." David felt tears in his eyes. "He said that?" "He did. And David, I love that little boy almost as much as I love his father." The word love hung in the air between them, and David realized that everything he had been afraid to hope for was actually possible. This incredible woman, who could have anyone she wanted, was choosing him and Tommy. "I love you too," he said, reaching for her hands. "Both of you have given me back my life." When they kissed, it felt like coming home after a long journey. All the walls they had built to protect themselves came down, and they found themselves planning a future together. 6 months later, Sterling Tech held another company event, but this time it was different. It was David and Victoria's wedding. A small ceremony in the company's beautiful lobby with Tommy as the ring bearer, and all their friends and colleagues as witnesses. Victoria wore a simple white dress, and David wore the same tuxedo from the charity dinner, but this time he owned it instead of renting it. Tommy stood proudly between them, holding their rings and beaming with happiness. "You know what the best part is?" Victoria whispered to David as they danced their first dance as husband and wife. "What's that?" David asked, spinning her gently. "Tommy told me yesterday that now he has 2 parents to help him become a scientist," she said, "and I told him that now I have 2 reasons to reach for the stars." As they danced, surrounded by people who had watched their love story unfold, David thought about how different his life was from 2 years ago. He had started as a single father taking a janitor job just to survive, never dreaming that he would find love, success, and a new family in the same place. Victoria looked up at her new husband and stepson, remembering the cold, lonely person she used to be. She had built a successful company, but David and Tommy had taught her that the most important things in life couldn't be measured in profits or achievements. They were measured in love, laughter, and the courage to let people into your heart. Together they had created something neither of them could have built alone, a family based on love, respect, and the belief that everyone deserves a second chance at happiness. And as they swayed to the music with Tommy giggling as he danced around their feet, they knew that their greatest adventure was just beginning.